Well, good evening, everybody. This is the third in a series of 3 talks. First one was what does the Bible say about meaning and purpose in life? And then we had one about what does the Bible say about suffering? And tonight's talk is what does the Bible have to say about true happiness? Does the Bible contain the secret for a happy life? Does it belong on the same shelf with those self-help books? Remember the kind of thing like how to win friends and influence people? There's a huge industry, isn't there, in producing books like that. Does the Bible belong on the shelf with those books? Can we expect to read the Bible and read it through and pick up a few principles, a few tips to life, make a few changes, and then suddenly find ourselves more fulfilled, more successful, with more friends, more sense of inner satisfaction, more happiness? Is that the way the Bible is going to work? I think you can tell from the way that I've phrased that I don't think that's the case. I'm going to suggest to you that the Bible operates on a different level. Does the Bible have a different understanding of what it is that makes us tick, of who we are, and therefore how we are best going to be fulfilled in life? My wife and I have been watching a series on a DVD series which we've been really enjoying. It's about some high-flying warriors in the States, and there's an intense rivalry between 2 firms. People who used to work together, they fall out, they separate. And in particular, there's 2 ladies who are great rivals. And there's one scene that particularly sticks in my mind, where these 2 ladies are brought together. There's been a tragedy, somebody has died very suddenly. It so happens to be the person that this leading lady, she was really in love with him. And so it's a moment of tragedy, emotions are raw, and the 2 rivals are put together, and one of them says to the other, what is it that you really want? And of course we're thinking about this rivalry that's between them and all that we've seen about all the things they've been doing to each other. And when she makes that question, we're thinking, well, she's probably going to say she wants a seat on the board, or she wants a big fat paycheck. That's the way it's been going. But it's different this time because emotions are raw, and this leading person, she's been evaluating her life, and so she doesn't come back with that kind of response. She doesn't say she wants this, that, or the other. She just says, I just want to be happy. You know, at that moment, instantly, you know, she's got our sympathy. We're there with her because, you know, isn't that what we all want? We just want to be happy. But so many of us never quite achieve that. You know, 50 years ago, the Rolling Stones sang, I can't get no satisfaction. I try and I try and I try, but I can't get no satisfaction. You know, that song touches a nerve, doesn't it? Because it's still true today. And many people would say that they're seeking something. They're seeking it in this, they're seeking it in that, they're doing this, they're doing that. They're trying to get that sense of inner satisfaction, and it just doesn't come. They touched a nerve there. And you know, in today's world, we have more. Ordinary folk have more than we've ever had before. And yet, so many of us are still miserable. We still feel that we lack something. So where do we search for happiness? You know, many of us search for happiness in romance, in love. And I love a good romance, a good romantic novel or a film. Pride and Prejudice is an example of a great romantic story. It's a sort of an 18th century fairy tale, really, where the ordinary girl marries the handsome prince. The feisty Elizabeth meets the haughty Darcy, and sparks fly, and eventually, through all the misunderstandings, the pride and the prejudice, eventually they're put to one side, they fall in love, and they get married. And the climax of the film is where the 2 key couples are brought together and they get married, and then we see them in their carriage riding off, and we see that they're riding off into a happy life, and it's all a very happy, sweet ending to a very enjoyable film. But I don't know if you're like me, but satisfaction because although I enjoyed the ending, I'm thinking to myself, but actually that's not the end. That's not the beginning. That's not the end. It's just the beginning. These people are going to have to go on and live ordinary lives. They're going to have to get on together. They're going to have to rub shoulders together. They're going to discover where all sorts of things, where one irritates the other. They're going to have to find some meaning, other things to do in their lives. There's going to be tension, there's going to be difficulties. It's not the end, it's just the beginning. You know, a friend of mine was passionately in love with his girlfriend, desperate to get married. And yet it wasn't that long after we got married that things seemed to start going wrong. And the wife said, he just doesn't talk to me. And she was so frustrated and unhappy. And that was a lot of years ago. And that couple are still together today. They've worked through their difficulties. They've overcome them. But, my point is that the romance, the love, the getting married wasn't the answer. It didn't bring them the happiness that they at first thought it would. I love being married. Getting married was one of the best things that ever happened to me. But what I'm saying is that if you think that getting married, finding the love of your life, you think that's going to be the answer, that's going to give you happiness, I think you're going to be disappointed. I think you're being incredibly naive. I think you're not being fair on your spouse, because what you're doing, you're putting on them, you're saying, I'm expecting you to be able to meet all my needs. That's not fair on your spouse. It's an unrealistic demand, and it's not going to work. You're going to be disappointed. So if romance is not the answer to our happiness, where else are we going to seek happiness? Many of us seek happiness through money, don't we? Many of us, we spend a lot of our time trying to get enough money together, trying to think, well, we are going to finally be secure. Well, if we can be secure enough financially, then we'll be happy. But you only have to look at the lives of some wealthy people to see that they're not all wonderfully happy and content. Some of us think that winning the lottery and having loads of money through that means is going to make us happy, but it doesn't always make people happy. It's not guaranteed. There are many tales of those people who won the lottery who don't end up being wonderfully happy. There was a guy called Jack Whittaker back in 2002 in the States. He won a fantastic lottery prize, $315 million on some kind of jackpot. First he gave millions to charity. He set up his own foundation with something like 14 million. But then things very quickly started to go wrong. Later on, a briefcase was found with over $500,000 in cash. It was taken from his car. He was outside a strip club, and this money was taken from outside while it was parked outside. Later, his office and his home were broken into, and he was arrested twice for drunk driving. His granddaughter died in suspicious circumstances. Everything seemed to go wrong. And apparently, later he said to reporters that he wished he'd torn the ticket up, because it didn't bring him the happiness that he thought it would. It seems that, having looked at a few of these kind of stories, it seems that if you are reasonably happy and secure when you get your lottery win, chances are that you are going to continue to be happy with it. But if when you get that win, you're not very stable, you're not very happy, you haven't got things sorted in your life, then the chances are that you're going to continue to be insecure and that you are going to continue to be unhappy. The lottery win in itself isn't going to change things for you. Examples abound of wealthy people who are unhappy. One famous example is the millionaire, the billionaire Howard Hughes. Some of you may have seen the film The Aviator about Howard Hughes. He was a man who made millions and millions, billions of dollars with jet airplanes, all kinds of things. And he became fantastically wealthy. But he was also a man with many kind of inner demons and many inner struggles. And towards the end of his life, he became a total recluse. He allowed his fingernails, his hair, his beard to grow. He didn't cut them. He just became a mess, And when he died, his body was in such a state that in order to identify him, they had to resort to fingerprints, and they found that his body was actually malnourished. Being wealthy doesn't necessarily bring us that happiness that we seek. What about success? You know, I was thinking about this and I just came to mind Elvis Presley. You know, Elvis Presley must have been one of the most successful singers of the 20th century. Known by everybody. And yet, towards the end of his life, he was desperately unhappy. He became fantastically overweight. He abused drugs. He was desperately unhappy. Academic studies have looked into this business of achieving life's major goals, including things like winning the lottery and getting married, and looked at the question, why don't they always end up making us happy? And what they say is that a big positive event like that, like winning the lottery, like getting married, can make you feel happy for a short time, but its effects diminish over time. Why is that? It's because it doesn't really change you. Doesn't matter what happens to you when you win a fantastic lottery prize or you marry the dream love of your life. Those things can help you in the short term, but it doesn't change who you are, and ultimately that is what makes the difference. So what does the Bible say about happiness? You know, actually, in most versions of the Bible, the word happiness doesn't come up very often. It's not often mentioned. The Bible does have a great deal to say about joy and about blessedness, being blessed, but it doesn't use that word happiness very often. I'm going to suggest to you some reasons why. But it does talk about inner fulfillment. You know, Jesus stood up in a crowd one day and he shouted out in a great loud voice, "If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me," Scripture has said, out of his heart, out of his innermost being, will flow rivers of living water. What was Jesus saying there? His promise was to those people who are thirsty. What he meant by that, he didn't mean literally thirsty. He meant having that inner thirst, that inner desire for something. You don't quite know what, you know. I think most of us can identify with that feeling of inner kind of restlessness. We're not satisfied with life. There's something missing. There's a nagging something. We don't know quite what it is, but we know we just haven't got it. You know, and I believe Jesus was addressing that kind of thing when he said, if you are thirsty, if you are conscious of that inner need, I can meet it for you. If you follow me, you won't thirst. He was promising that in the fulfillment. And actually, he went beyond that because he said, not only will you be fulfilled inwardly, so you're not craving for something that you don't have, not only that, he said, you will be somebody who has something to offer others. Out of your innermost being will flow rivers of living water. He's saying, I will give you a life-giving message, a life-changing message that you will be able to offer to other people. That was the promise of Jesus. So there is a sense in which the Bible talks about inner fulfillment, I believe. But it's not its major focus. The Bible does have a great deal to say about joy and about blessedness, not so much about happiness. Why is that? I want to suggest to you that there's a very good reason why the Bible doesn't talk about happiness in our terms. In order to understand that, you have to have an idea of how the worldview of the Bible is very different from the worldview that most of us have today. Because when in today's society we talk about being happy, we are thinking about our needs being met. We are thinking about being fulfilled and content. In the French have an expression which goes something like this, feeling good in your skin. And I think that sums it up really well. We consider somebody who is happy, who is at peace within himself or herself. There's no stresses, there's no strains, there's no unfulfilled longings or unfulfilled needs. All is well within us. We're content with who we are. We would say that kind of person is happy. If I were to draw a big circle to represent the world, the universe, everything that is, in order to represent the worldview that we have today, if I was to draw a great big circle of everything there is, I would put a dot in the centre and I would label that me, or self. Because today's worldview worldview is centered on self. What is important is what I need. My physical, mental, emotional needs must be met. That's the mantra of our age, I would say. That is what we believe. If we can meet those needs, if we can get what we want, if we can fulfill those things, then we feel we will be happy. It starts with me, with myself. You know, my wife came across a poster on Facebook the other day. It just went like this. It said this: happiness starts with you. Not with your relationships, not with your job, not with your friends, but with you. And you know, and all of us, we sort of are nodding inside and say, oh yeah, I can see where you're going with that. But you know, that is today's worldview. That is the way our society today approaches life. That sums up today's mindset pretty well, I would say. Happiness starts with me. But you know, this is where the Bible is so different. The Bible has a completely different approach. If we were to draw a big circle to represent how the Bible views the world, the universe, its approach to life, we draw a great big circle and we put at the center not self, not me, but God. God is at the center of the universe. That is what the Bible teaches, and you know, the Bible is amazingly consistent about that. The Bible begins with God and it ends with God. The very first words of the Bible are, in the beginning God. In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And the last chapter of the Bible, in the book of Revelation, the last chapter talks about Jesus, the Son of God, and how he is going to be at the center of everything. It talks about him being the Alpha and the Omega. That's the A and the Z of the Greek alphabet. So he's saying it's going to be the beginning and the end. It's saying that the Son of God is going to be there, the culmination of all things. God will be there. It's saying heaven. So the last chapter of the Bible talks a lot about heaven, what heaven's going to be like. And you know, heaven's going to be heaven because he is there. That is what's going to make heaven heaven, because God is there. And in that last chapter it talks about there will be no need for the sun, because the light of Jesus, the light of God, will be all the light that we need. He will be at the center of everything. Once we get that, everything else slots into place. God created mankind to commune with him, to be in relationship with him. That's how God meant things to be. That's how it was right in the beginning in the Garden of Eden. That's the picture that we see the Bible paints of how God meant things to be. He meant things to be like Adam and Eve were, in communion, in relation with God. They communed together in the garden. And that's how God wanted it to be. Because God made us for relationship, and above all, relationship with him. But of course we all know the story, that it didn't last because Adam and Eve disobeyed God. Things went badly wrong because Adam and Eve took a wrong turn. They made a wrong choice, and as a result of that, they lost that place of trust and intimacy with God. And God punished them for that. And their punishment was to be cast out of the garden, out of the presence of God. It's so hugely symbolic about that. It wasn't just that they weren't in the garden anymore, it was that they were outside of the presence of God. They'd lost that relationship. That was what was lost in the Garden of Eden. It was that relationship with God that was lost. And you know, throughout the rest of the Bible, God is seeking to regain that relationship. Right at the beginning of Genesis, they've hardly got out of the Garden of Eden, and God is saying that he's going to put into action a rescue plan. And we see that even in that first book of Genesis, there are all kinds of pointers that are pointing to the way that God is going to rescue the situation, and he's going to bring man back into relationship with himself. And all through the Old Testament, we've got pointers to that. We've got prophecies about it, we've got hints, we've got all kinds of things that point us to what God is going to do to bring us back into relationship with him. And, you know, that is what God did when he sent Jesus. When he sent Jesus, that was his way ultimately of bringing us back into relationship with him. I've lost my place in my notes, so I'm just going to have to pause for a minute, bear with me. Got a bit carried away there. We were cast out of God's presence in when Adam and Eve had to leave the garden, God has been working towards bringing us back into a relationship with himself. And the way that he did that was to send Jesus Christ, his own son, to die a cruel death on the cross so that we could be brought back into that relationship with him. And the way that works is that the thing that divides us from God, the thing that means we don't have a relationship anymore with God, is that we have sinned. We've all done wrong things. Because God is holy, you can't look on sin. That's a barrier. That means that we can't relate to God. There's something that's as though God is over here. He's wanting to have that relationship with us, but he looks on us and he sees that we're doing wrong things, we're doing wicked things, and he says, he can't have that. He has to punish wrongdoing. And so there is no relationship with him. And so that's why he sent Jesus to take the punishment that we deserve for the wrong things that we've done onto himself. You might say to me, why does God have to punish sin? Why can't he just let people off? If God is love and God is good, why does he have to punish sin? Well, let me give you a couple of thoughts on that. Think of a judge today. If we knew of a judge who was of such a good heart, he wanted to be kind, he wanted to be good to all the people that got brought into court. And so because of his kindness, every person that was brought into his court to be tried, he would let them off. He wouldn't convict any of them because he was so kind-hearted, he had such goodwill towards all these people, he thought, no, I can't possibly send them to prison. He wanted to be kind to them. Would we think that he was a good judge? I don't think we would. You know, there's been a recent case, you may have seen in the news, Lord Janner. Now, I don't know whether he really is guilty or not, but Lord Janner has been accused of some very serious crimes with children, and but he's an old man, he's suffering from dementia. And so the CPS has ruled that he's not to be brought to trial. And some of the victims of those crimes are not very happy about that. And I think many people in society are not very happy about that. They're not comfortable with the fact that this man may have committed some horrendous things, and yet he's going to get off scot-free. The victims aren't even going to have their day in court for him to be tried. Most people feel that justice hasn't taken place. But it's the same in the universe. If God doesn't deal with sin, if God lets wrongdoing go off scot-free, then he's not just, and he's not good. So God has to punish sin. But if we accept that, if we accept that God must punish sin, then we have a problem, because we are sinners too. We all do wrong things. Or maybe you don't accept that you are a sinner. It's such an old-fashioned word, isn't it, after all? Who talks about that nowadays? Well, let me just put a scenario for you. If you feel that you are basically a good person, you cannot imagine that God will punish you because you feel you've basically done your best to be good. Let me just humour me a moment. Here's a scenario. Imagine that God has rigged up a sort of invisible recording device that hangs around your neck, and this recording device has been programmed in a special way, so it only records when you make moral statements about other people, okay, particularly about when people have done things wrong. So every time you say something like, that's wrong, or he should have done something, she shouldn't have done that, or he ought to, she ought to, or I can't believe they're going to get away with that. Every time you make a statement like that, it gets logged on this invisible recording device. And then at Judgment Day, when you're standing before God, and God asks you, have you lived a good life? And maybe you say, well, yeah, I believe I have lived a good life. And God says, well, look, I know that you don't accept what I put in the Bible about what really is good and isn't good. So So what I'm going to do is I'm going to judge you according to what you have said yourself. I'm going to judge you according to your own criteria. And at that point, God replays all the things that have got recorded on that invisible recording device. Every time you criticize somebody or say they were doing wrong, or they ought to have done something else, or they ought not to have done this or that, and God sort of makes a list of the criteria for right and wrong, good and bad, sin and evil. He makes a list of those things according to what you have said, and then he says, look, I'm going to judge you by what you have said. And so at that point, if you just humour me by following this through, where would you stand if God did something like that to you? According to what you have said about other people, would you be innocent? Or would you stand condemned by your own works? Because you haven't fulfilled, you haven't lived a completely good life, even according to what you've said yourself. The wrong things that we do make a barrier between us and a holy God. And we can never be happy until that barrier has been taken away. Because we were made for a relationship with God. It's in our spiritual DNA. Apart from God, we are like a fish out of water. We're like a polar bear in the desert. We're like a soaring eagle trapped in a cage. We'll never find the fulfillment that we seek while we look for it in ourselves. Once we have this self-centered view of reality, back to my circle with the center in the middle, once that is our world view, that is the way that we see things, everything centered on me or my needs, my wants, we can never be happy because that is the way that we were programmed to be. God didn't design us to be that way. There will always remain that nagging something that is missing, that isn't right, because we're not living the way God intended us to live. We've got the wrong perspective. Instead of looking out for me at the center, we need to be putting God in the middle. You are not at the center of the universe, God is. You are not at the center of the universe, God is at the center. That's the Bible picture. Once we get that, then God can begin to work within us and it changes. I want to just take a bit more time just to look at, just a few minutes, just to look at God's solution in a little bit more detail. I've already said a few things. God, throughout the Bible, was leading up to Jesus coming. And the whole thing culminates in God sending His Son to die for us. That was God's ultimate rescue plan. Jesus Christ would die a cruel death, and He would take the punishment that we deserve. And that's the way that God would reconcile His problem, because God had a problem, because He wanted to be just, He wanted to do right. He didn't want to be like that kind judge that we talked about earlier, who so blatantly was a useless judge. He wasn't doing his job properly. God didn't want to be in that situation where He wasn't doing his job of being a just God. He needed to be just. But He wanted also to be loving, because He designed us to be in relationship with Himself. So God wanted to be both loving and just. How can He reconcile the two? And the way that He found to do it was to send His own Son, Jesus Christ, to die in our place, and He could take our sin. That way He could be just. But that way He could also be loving, because by doing that, He could take away the barrier, and He could begin to draw us to Himself. And one of the glorious things is that God, because God is God, I don't know if you've ever thought about this, because God knows everything before it happens. God had agreed on this plan before He made anything. Before He created the world, before, He said in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, the first words of the Bible. But before that time, God had already determined in His heart what He was going to do. He knew Adam and Eve were going to sin. He knew that was going to go wrong through their own deliberate fault, not through God's fault, through their choice. He knew that. He had a plan to draw us back. It was a very costly plan, because it would mean that the Son of God Himself would have to suffer an agonizing death and have to suffer that separation where the two who had been together in all eternity, Jesus the Son, God the Father, they'd been together enjoying sweet fellowship in all eternity. In that moment on the cross they were separated. And that was agonizing and painful to both of them. But they were willing to do it because they wanted to make it possible for you and I to be in a relationship with them. God paid a price so that we could be happy, we could be fulfilled, we could have that relationship with Him. And you know, it gets even better than that, because God isn't got that relationship. It isn't just about putting us back to where Adam and Eve were. It goes hugely beyond that, because God has done great and wonderful things as well as that, because of Jesus, He says that we can become His children, that He will put His Spirit within us, and then we can call God Father because of what He's put within us. That makes it hugely better, even than what that paradise that Adam and Eve experienced. That really pales into insignificance as to the promise that we have, that we want that one day we're going to be in heaven, but we're going to be related to God. We can genuinely call Him Father. That's an amazing relationship. Well, who gets to experience this ultimate happiness that I'm talking about? Is it those people who deserve it? Well, no, if you think about it, it can't be those who deserve it, because in order to deserve it, you'd have to live a perfect life. You'd have to never sin. That's the only way that you could deserve God's perfect happiness. So that can't be it. It can't be those who deserve it. What it is, we get to start on this great journey with Jesus by accepting that He died in our place, that He took the penalty for my wrongdoing. It's a free gift. There's nothing we can do to earn it. And that's a really hard thing for many people to get their heads around. It's an absolutely free gift. But it's a free gift, but we do have to take it seriously. We can't just say, oh great, wonderful, I'll have that, and then go on and live our lives as though nothing can happen. That's not going to work. It's a free gift, but we have to take it seriously. We have to recognize that we have done wrong. So much so that the only solution was that the God of heaven should die a cruel death in our place. That's huge, that's immense. We have to feel the weight of that. We have to let God just help us so that sinks in. We have to recognize that sin is a big deal. I know we don't like that word. But that's what the Bible says. We have to commit ourselves then to living no longer a self-centered life, but a God-centered life. Instead of doing what we want, we commit our life to living in obedience to what God wants. This is no light matter. This is huge. Once we've moved from that self-centered life to a God-centered universe, we have to change the way we live in order to fit in with what God wants. We have to live in such a way that it's in sync with God being at the center of our lives. Our chief aim is no longer to please ourselves, but to please Him. All that we do must be subject to Him. So becoming a Christian is at the same time entirely free and very costly. Salvation is a free gift, but living for Christ will demand all that you have. And I think maybe that's the point where some of us step back and we think, well, yeah, maybe it's true. If I could just add Christianity to my way of life along with other things that I could do, and every once in a while I could just dip into a bit of Christianity and say I call myself a Christian, maybe put a fish symbol on my car or wear a cross around my neck, and I could leave it at that and go and do everything else as I normally do. I think a lot of us would be comfortable with that, but Jesus Christ won't allow that. Because what He says is that He demands all that we have. Jesus put it like this in one of the Gospels. He said this: if anyone would come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. So there you have, you see, the contrast between the world's view with self at the centre. That's the bit where it says he wants to save his life. Those people who are just putting all their effort in trying to find what's making them happy, they've got self at the centre. They're trying to fulfill their own wants, their own needs. But Jesus says, if you go that way, you're going to lose it. If you want to find fulfillment, if you want to find life, then you've got to be willing to lose life for the sake of Jesus. The Bible does not promise happiness in this life. There will be trials and difficulties. It promises those. But you know, with that, there will be the peace of knowing that we are right with God. The peace that comes from knowing that we are forgiven. You know, there's nothing like that. There's nothing that can match that, knowing that ultimately nobody will be able to accuse us, because we will always be able to say, yes, I did wrong, but Jesus paid the price. Jesus took what I deserve. I don't need to worry about that anymore. I don't need to feel guilty about that anymore. God has dealt with it. You know, there's no peace like knowing that. There will be a joy for us in worshiping Him, in developing that relationship with Him. It doesn't mean that everything is instantly wonderful, because there are trials, there are difficulties. We're still sinful, we still get it wrong, we still make mistakes. You know, God is teaching us, God is shaping us, and we've got this glorious hope. The Bible promises us that once we've really met with Him, once He's done that within us, to make us His followers, to make us born again. That's what that means. We become a new person. It's such a wonderful phrase that has been so misused. Once we're on that path, we can be assured that God will keep us. And one day we will be with Him, and then we will know ultimate peace with Him.